Hello, everyone, and welcome to another vidcast. I'm absolutely still enjoying the FA Cup win. I'm going to get that in early. It's a lot of people have said get over it, but I refuse to. Just
a lot
the
of
way
people
it
like
is.
Steve and I.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, funny enough, we've just spent 10 minutes talking about Arsenal off camera, so maybe that is it for the day now. So, obviously, welcoming our guest, as you can see, Steve Spencer, Ops Director. How are you, Steve?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, you've heard about this, haven't you? This is like the next big thing.
I have. I just, I can see this going really big. Yeah, I can sense this is going really big. Yeah, so it's I'm not taking it hard, in a bad way that I'm about number 6 on the list that you've come to. But hey, I don't mind.
What a lot of people don't appreciate. We should just get this in here. I think is that when we're sort of booking people in for this, there's quite a lot that goes on in terms of negotiations with people's diaries and stuff. Right?
Yeah.
Steve, I can honestly say your diary is probably the most busy diary I have ever. I've worked for MPs, and your diary's busy. I mean, we sort of seem to start at 7, finish at kind of 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and there's very little space in between. So we're really grateful for you taking the time.
No, that's no problem.
Great.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So, I mean, obviously, we've kind of, the country's gone through a lot over the last sort of, 6 to 8 months, really. I mean, how's it been for you, when that kind of period started in March, we went into lockdown? How's it been for you and your role? And it must have been a massive challenge.
Oh, yeah, I think, I can't remember one of my team at the time. It was, we termed them the Boris bombs. It was the kind of the throw the grenade in the water and see what you had to deal with. You had to deal with it. And it was, I never forget the days. The 16th of March was the first one, and then the 23rd. And it was, I think, for me, it was a really uncertain period. It was, we'd everybody been prepared. We'd started thinking about COVID, and we dusted off. We have flu pandemic plans and contingency plans. We have all that, and so we were all asked, and we were dusting them all off and making sure we were ready. But I don't think anybody envisaged what landed in those announcements. They'd never formed part of any previous guidance or anything we'd ever come across before, or any of the issues we had to deal with. And I think, for me and the team and for us as a business, it found we had to really adapt very quickly. We had to learn very quickly. I became a COVID expert, reading every document I could find, understanding how we could interpret what was said and put into practice. And, that was, I think, one of the toughest times, I think, was the uncertainty and the unknown when that first landed. How are we going to adapt? How are we going to pick up what's been announced, and how does that apply to us, and what does it apply to the service we provide? Because clearly, we said this right from day one, we can talk about the time of the NHS and many other aspects of society, but quite frankly, if people don't have running water, most things come for a pretty abrupt stop. And it was therefore, how do we play our part? How do we play, how do we link in with, the announcements that are coming out? How do we adapt to that? And what does that mean for us? And clearly, you have 101 questions. I have 101 questions. My team had 100. The people in the field had 101 questions. And it was therefore, how do we give them an element of certainty and answer some of those so we can kind of get on with the job? And I think that those early days were I must admit, you literally sit there at night. I was sat there with my wife, and you just be like, oh my God, what do we do? And you just kind of had to bounce things around, and and I think the one thing for me which made a huge difference was that I think the importance of what we do and the purpose of why we are as a business, I think, resonated with so many people in the business, and people understood how important we were, that actually the way that, particularly in my area, the frontline adapted was just fantastic. Yeah, I could not have asked for more. And the way that they just took it all in the stride, we dealt with the queries that came up, we put the right practices in place, and it just meant really we could carry on. And hopefully most people saw that the service continued as normal. But I must admit, those early days were, what more, the scenarios we were thinking is we were having games about how tight can lockdown get? Yeah. How far could it go? Yeah. Before you start, you start thinking about, what it really means. So yeah, it was You know, and I think we've now got into a little bit of a stride. We've got a kind of a bit of a new norm. You know, things constantly change anyway as lockdowns ease, then local lockdowns come in and that kind of thing. But generally we've taken it in our stride, I think, pretty well. You know, we're adapting as we go. But I think we all recognise now we're in this for a bit of a long run, to be honest. This isn't going to suddenly disappear. So we've got to be prepared for that and plan for it and see what that means. And, you know, so overall, I think pretty well. I think it's gone pretty well. Early days were a little bit, I don't know, it was a little bit.
Yeah.
I think we all had anxiety in that first period. Let's not be honest. You know, it doesn't matter if you run a business, director, any part of the business in society, you've got anxiety. And I was the same. You know, I didn't know what it really meant and what it means for me and my family. And so, yeah, so it was anxious times. But, you know, I think we kind of feel a lot more comfortable now, a little bit more relaxed. And I think if we get a second wave, we know what to do. You know, we're prepared.
Yeah. I think. I mean, in my world, in social media, sort of what I do day to day. I mean, the amount of praise we saw for our front line was amazing. Like so I've been here 3 years and I've never seen positive sentiment like that. We're always battling, you know, against something. But here in certainly March and April, it was just like actually people were praising us. And I think, you know, for I think we've talked about it on previous vidcasts, Miles, haven't we? That for us it was different, but we were working from home. For the frontline guys who were out there and guys and girls, it was just an amazing response. And I mean, how challenging was that? Because you must have had frontline, you know, employees, colleagues asking questions that we just didn't know the answers to, but they've got lives, they've got health, they've got.
Yeah, I think I think. Well, I kind of tried to be a little bit. At least I tried to be anyway. But you know, I just had to be honest. You know, there were times when we started doing some more company-wide we did the company-wide comms to start with. We tried to answer the more obvious questions, and you had to break it down. You had to break it down because, you know, a large proportion of a front line, you know, will get in a van in the morning. They can work on their own. They tend to be single in the vans. They go out and about, and then they meet up with people, primarily say for a two-man job or as a team to chat about things and etc. So, you know, you could keep the day job going, and you could look at that, and you could see, you know, how they could keep the assets running. They could carry on doing their jobs without having to interface too much with other people. And a lot of the work was behind what we call behind the fence. So they weren't necessarily having to interact with the public. The tougher jobs came with a front line that were very much interacting with the public on a daily basis. So whether you were what we call an NST, so somebody who operates, maintains the network and deals the first port of call with customers on the water side, you imagine a lot of their work is driven by customers. So therefore, they've got to engage with customers. They've got to potentially go into people's properties. They've got to, you know, because obviously when people say don't have water, it doesn't necessarily always relate to one of our assets. Maybe it might be something the way that we're connected into their property. So for us, we had to focus on particular areas, and what we simply had to do early on was just make some decisions that certain work we weren't going to do unless it was an emergency, because we just hadn't got ourselves in a place we understood how we were going to manage that work in a way that was both safe for our people and for our customers. So we took the decision on certain things like going into people's properties. Stop. We don't go into people's properties unless it's an absolute emergency. At which point then we had some very special, we then wrote special procedures for doing that around full PPE and masks and disposal and all that kind of stuff, but tried to minimise it. So it was quite hard because there was no blanket rule you could apply. You had to look at every aspect of the operation. You had to break it down and then provide the necessary guidance for each part. And some of it took us, to be honest, working with some of the trade union reps, took us some while to get ourselves together, really, in terms of knowing exactly what to do, because the guidance constantly changed. Don't wear masks. Do wear masks, you know. 2 meters, or is 2 meters right, or should it be more? Or, you know, all that we took the decision that we would always look at the government advice and from Public Health England and look at then how that adapted in our business. We were never going to try and make it up ourselves because we just weren't the experts and it was such an unknown. But like I say, it posed a lot of questions, and therefore it was a lot of communication, clarity where we could. We did make some black and white decisions to be on the safe side. you know, and then over time we've kind of evolved as we've learnt more, and we've adapted and understood what the risks are and how we deal with them. But yeah, I'd say early on there was a lot of questions and a lot of things we had to resolve. Now they're fewer and far between. The bigger questions now are coming back in the fact that we're trying to bring back some normality, because customers now are very much understood in those early days that it was to stop work was fine, close things down, etc. But now, understandably, we're several months on, and all of our expectations are changing now in the fact that we now need to adapt we now want to return to almost the same service as before, covering all the services we provided, but we've got to do that in a safe way. Yeah. And that bit now for us is we're just in the final elements of restoring everything that we did previously.
What a lot of people might not know, Steve, I suppose, is that usually when something big is happening or something goes wrong, you're usually ultimately the person at the top of the tree. So you sort of lead that kind of gold command structure. And so you've been involved with a huge range of things over the last few years, you know, whether it's, you know, Beast from the East or Brexit, which of course was the big thing before we kind of moved into the kind of COVID world. How, given that, and given your kind of career, and I know you've worked abroad and done lots of other things, would you say that this kind of whole kind of coronavirus period of time since March has been the biggest challenge that you've ever faced professionally?
I think in terms of, I think it ranks right up there as very much so, because there are certain things that are a real challenge in the role that I do. Yeah. And for me, you know, the things that I find the things that I find tough and almost personally quite tough are when we have a significant impact on our customers. Yeah. So whether that's because we have periods of time when we cannot get water, like the Beast from the East, when people were out water for several days at times, or we've had major water main bursts that have flooded people's properties, or we have flooding on the back of today's Storm Francis, some flooding that impacts people quite significantly. You know, that for me is a tough part of the job, because you never ever want to see people in that position. And you know, we do all we can to prevent it, but occasionally the nature of what we do and the nature of the assets means that does happen, and that's tough. And you have to deal with that at the time that it comes up. But I think for a company-wide, just going into the unknown, you know, for each of those instances I've just mentioned in operations, I've got experience of them. Unfortunately, I've been in plenty of situations where I've had to deal with that. It's not a nice situation. It's a tough part of the job, but I've got experience. With COVID, it was like, right, okay, where do you go? There was, and this was one of the things we were talking about to the staff. There is no guidance. There's no book you get off a shelf to say this is how you deal with it. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. And I think as the public, I think everybody could recognise that it was one step in front of the other all the time. So therefore, that situation of not being able to really call on huge amounts of experience, not being able to, there's nothing, no manual you could pull off the shelf. There was, you had to adapt as you went, and you just didn't know what was around the corner. You know, you had no idea what was around the corner, what would be announced. You know, if you think we were watching the after the key announcements from Boris, we were having to watch the daily announcements, because even though we had information and links into government through DEFRA, etc., the government body that we deal with in the industry, there were still announcements that were made at quite short notice. So we were always had someone on the lookout for those daily announcements to see what was going to happen, and therefore we would have to then work into the evening to understand what that meant, so we could communicate the next day with our staff to give them some clarity. And that for me was where the toughest element came. Because you couldn't really plan too far in the future. You know, in the job that I do, you know, you can pretty much guarantee that you've got to supply water and you've got to take the waste stuff away. And you can plan for that. But in this situation, you couldn't, because you didn't know what was going to be today, tomorrow, or next week. And therefore that uncertainty for an industry that's relatively certain about what we do was quite that was tough. And that was the hardest part of it.
And also, I mean, obviously, you know, we're all human beings, and this is something we've asked sort of Kelly and Lynn and George. But I mean, from a personal level, how has it impacted you? Because you've said it yourself, you've got a family, and we talked about going to watch Wigan. So, you know, all that kind of stuff. Like, how has it affected you personally?
I'd have to say it, for quite a period, it just took over my life. It is all I ever thought about. It was all I ever read up on. I literally lost all interest outside work, if you know what I mean, because it was just so encompassing in terms of what it meant, because I just knew that if we did not get this right, or we had some issues, then at any point during that time, if we then had a situation whereby we couldn't supply water, for example, the impact and the consequence was just going to be magnified and escalated, because clearly it was the situation we're in was particularly heightened because particularly hand washing and hygiene was such an important part of combating COVID. If we therefore had any kind of issues, then my God, it was going to be magnified. It was going to be important. It was going to be. So for me, that kind of in my head going around all the scenarios that could happen, what would we need to put in place? What were the challenges? You know, and it wasn't just me, my team, and many others were doing the same. But for me personally, it was an all-encompassing period of time, where it's all I ever thought about. So even if I was, at weekends, I'd be reading up about it, understanding things, what that meant. I'll be thinking through the scenarios and what the things that we need to cover. And every Monday, I think my people used to hate me because at the time I was doing Go Command and I'd come back on a Monday with a whole list of stuff that we needed to consider. And I'd be firing it off to people to think about because it was I knew, like you say, in the job I've got, the buck stops with me, and I can't that's part of why I like the job and part of why it's a tough job as well. But it does, and I therefore felt I couldn't rely on lots of other people just alone. I had to make sure I was on top of it, and I knew I could learn as much as I possibly could about it, so that I could provide whatever steer, guidance, and support I could for the team. But it did mean that for me, my family lost me for a period of time. My hobbies went out the window, and it was at times it was quite tough, and I've got a great family. To be quite frank, having worked most of my time in operations in my career, my family have had to learn to be understanding. And they were incredibly understanding, and I can, particularly my wife, I can bounce things around with my wife and have a chat with her about things, and she's a great sounding board. So for me, it was I had to get all those things in my head kind of sorted out and talk with my family and talk with people at work, but it was a tough time in that way. I couldn't switch off. I'll be honest, I didn't feel I could ever switch off until we got a good, say, 6 weeks into it, really, and things started to calm down a little bit.
So as you say, things started to calm down in the COVID, and then we had supply and demand, which kind of took over. So it never stops. I mean, how was that for you, and how do you think the summer has gone generally? Because obviously it's a sensitive time.
So it's one of the big things that we, for us, I think supply demand, as we term it, obviously is a situation whereby, the challenge we have in hot weather is to make sure we can keep up with the demand that our customers, how quickly customers are using water, and invariably it's our water networks are a delicate balance. You can't just have infinite size water pipes and infinite size assets, because then in the winter, or like today, the water would never get through the pipes, and it would be pretty horrible stuff when it got to the other end. So you've got to have there's this optimum kind of sweet spot for your assets, which means you can deal with hot weather and you can deal with whether it's cold weather. And the problem we have with supply demand is that when then the demand shoots up, no matter how hard we pump it through the pipes and how quick we pump it through, we physically at times struggle to get the supply to every customer. And it was particularly heightened this summer because we didn't know what impact COVID was going to have. We did know, and we did observe, that the demands in London had dropped off a cliff. We were not seeing the water demand hit London, and we knew that was happening because also on the other side, our sewage treatment works down in East London, Beckton, a big one for most of London, was actually seeing a massive drop off in flow coming into the works as well. So we saw this exodus out of London, But where were those people going to go? And therefore, what we found is they obviously went to a variety of areas, but we particularly found that they went into a southern region around Guildford, Kent, and then into the Thames Valley. And we saw our average demand for water step up roughly about 10 or 15% in those areas, which might not seem a lot, but it's a, if you think about Thames Valley and Guildford, that's nearly 70 to 100 million litres of water extra a day that we've got to do. So we can cope with that. Our systems are able to do that. But then when you get to the point where you have a month like May, which was what was May, 7% of expected rainfall, a very dry period, then followed with a really warm period in the late 20s type period in May, quite unusual weather for May, we saw demand just shoot up and escalate to historic levels that we had never seen. So in all of our records, we'd never seen that level of demand for customers. And I think it was related to the fact that people were at home. It'd been a long dry period followed by a hot period. And we had to react. And it was, I think for a lot of water companies, all the water companies around the UK saw this change. And for us, we had to react. And we've done a lot of preparation anyway. We've been doing lots of preparation for summer because we know demand goes up. But we had to make sure and bring those kind of enforce that, get that in, those plans in place very quickly. We managed to, it was something that we were monitoring every few hours how we were doing. But we got to a period whereby it didn't matter how much water we were producing and putting into what we call our service reservoirs, where we store treated water, the demand coming off it was greater than what we could put in. And even people produce more, well, we couldn't produce more because we were taking the maximum we were allowed from the environment. Yeah. So we'd really hit this kind of buffer in a number of places, and therefore we went through this period whereby for periods of time, maybe what we call peak draw, 5 and 8 o'clock at night when people coming back from work or having a shower or watering the garden or those kind of things, quite a number of our customers primarily suffered low pressure or a short period where they didn't have water, and then they would recover. And we had a couple of areas where people did lose water for about 24 hours, which was something we, it was hard for us because we'd put so much in, and our teams had put so much in, and we'd manned sites 24/7 to make sure they were constantly running. We'd done all kinds of things. For people then to go without was quite it was hard for us. It was quite a hit for us to take, and hard from the teams. But again, they responded well, and it was interesting that as soon as the rain arrived, or even the temperature dropped off, I think we saw the demand drop by, the numbers were unbelievable, 20% just dropped in 24 hours. Wow. So we got to the point whereby the next challenge was then ramping back all of our treatment works quick enough, because then we'd have produced too much and be pumping and flooding things. So it was a real, it's the industry has got lots of models and predictions based on weather, as you can imagine, and we have those models. We can put temperatures in, we can put weather conditions in, we can forecast ahead, and we can then look from historic demands what the likely amount of water our customers are going to use. They went out the window. That time in May redefined completely what kind of demand we could expect from our customers. We'd never seen anything like it, and we had to then rebuild those models and kind of calibrate those models ready for any more hot periods in summer, which came then in August when we had how many days above 30 odd degrees. It was just unbearable, wasn't it? It was just unbearable. And we saw demand go up, not quite the same level, but not far off. But actually, because we'd got the models, we'd done some additional planning. Our models had helped us a little bit. We were able to get through that period in a better position than what we'd done in May, which came as a bit of a. It was like COVID. You think about it, it was just an unknown. It was so new. How do you plan for something that's never happened before? Yeah. And that was the position we're in. But I think overall, particularly what happened at the front and what the teams did and just the effort they put in, it was a tough period, and it was, but the team responded really well. Some customers did get impacted, which, we're never happy about. But overall, as a percentage of our customer base, we kept it to a relatively small number, which is I guess no sucker for the people that were impacted, but
course.
for our overall customer base, we managed to keep the vast majority in supply. But again, it was another period when it took over your life. Evening meetings, weekend meetings, just trying to make sure we could keep everybody, in water.
Steve, so, yeah. I've often sort of thought this about your role, and the conversation we've had, to this point, I think everybody watching this will agree that you cover so much ground. There's so much stuff that you have to know, or you have to understand to be able to kind of make the decisions and run the business in the way that you do. How do you go about becoming an operations director then? What kind of skills and qualities do you think is important to be able to do what you do?
Wow, a great question. I think the one thing for me that's helped me in the role is that through my career, so I've now been, I joined the water industry in '93. So what am I now, 27 years in. As an individual, I get bored easily. Yeah. So what I did particularly in my in that first part of my career, I just did loads of different jobs. Yeah, I didn't have a defined career path. My background is I'm a chemical engineer by training, but I knew I didn't want to do that kind of theoretical engineering. But I wanted a career that would help me apply some of the kind of logic thinking, problem solving type, which I kind of stumbled into the water industry. Never really, it just was an off chance. I applied to another water company and got on the graduate program, never even thinking that it was a career choice really. But when I got in, I just realised that the number of, the variety of roles was just enormous. I don't think people appreciate just the variety of what a water company does. And the water industry offered me that chance to deal with my boredom. And therefore, it meant I could move around hugely. I moved around. I did dozens and dozens of jobs, which for me allowed me to think about the, how can I say it, learn the business and the industry on a very broad basis, and that undoubtedly has helped me. Yeah, undoubtedly has helped me through the time. I think in terms of the kind of personal skills you would need for a role like this, there's definitely you have to have an element of personal resilience. Yeah, and you need to be, I think, I say stay calm, but you have to have a mentality where I'm not a hugely emotional person. The only time I get really emotionally charged is like when my kids were born, or when Wigan won the FA Cup, or whatever it is. Yeah, that kind of thing for me is I'm a relatively calm. I don't lose my rag. I don't blow my top very often. If people do, it's a hell of a shock to people because it's so rare. So there's an element of, you've got to accept that you're going to have all kinds of things thrown at you, yeah, and therefore you've got to be able to deal with, be calm, also not worry about that as well. If you worry about that, then that's the thing. So that calmness is something that I think that you need, and I just think, for me, I think, being able to deal with complexity, high volumes of work, and understanding how you work your way through them, ambiguity, and trying to bring some sense, and because you get all this kind of noise coming in, you need to be able to distill that, particularly for when you're in operations. It's really important that everybody's really clear about what role they need to fill and how they want them to go about doing it, and therefore being able to bring that in almost like a funnel and distill it and give clarity is one of the important aspects I've found in this role. And the final bit is never ever think you can solve everything. Yeah, if you think you can come into a role like this and think you can solve every problem we've got as a business, or every problem that we may face, then it's going to be hard. And what I try to do is look at what's important and try and get them in my head logically, how we solve them and the way we work through them, and then just knock them off one at a time. Yeah, and eventually, when you look back in a year or two's time, you've come a huge distance. But if you worry about that all at one go, it becomes overwhelming. Yeah. So it's a for me, I couldn't have done the role I've done without lots of experience of different parts of the industry, and dealing with, really dealing with some of those incidents and events that occurred that really shape what's important in the role that we do. You know, and I couldn't have done it without that, and that helps me then. So when, particularly as younger, you know, I say younger, but as people are new in their career in the water sector, you know, trying to give them that kind of balance around, you know, what's important, what's not so important, what things can we park, what things do we need to focus on, I think is something that you know, maybe in any job as an exec you need to do that, but in this particular role I find that's incredibly important. Otherwise we literally would drown in just what we want to try and do.
Yeah.
Just before we wrap up, I mean, what does the next sort of 6 months look like for you? I mean, let's presume there isn't a second spike and the unpredictable stuff doesn't happen, but what does the next, I mean, winter, presumably, obviously, but what?
Yeah, so we're always, that's always something that we do anyway. So you get, we always talk about, you get 2 sweet spots in the year, which is autumn and spring, because you're not too hot and in theory you're not too cold. Yeah, quite nice. You can suffer from heavy rain, which you've got to deal with. So you've always got to be, as you go through the seasons, you've always got to be prepared. You've always got to be have your plans in place. So we don't know this winter whether it's going to be a really cold, dry winter with like a beast from the east type scenario. Hopefully we never face one of them again, because that was a very unique weather pattern that you know, I think we had a 20-odd degree swing in one day or something like that. It was a ridiculous situation. But anyway, you know, so you've got to prepare for that. You've also got to be prepared for lots of rain. Yeah. And, you know, so you've got to be prepared for if we have lots of rain and what we call the groundwater comes up, then the groundwater comes up to ground level. Then when it does rain beyond that point, the water's got nowhere to go. So that's when it becomes the most challenging for us as a water company. So for us, we have to, next 6 months, we have to plan for those things. But that's, to be honest, that's I think for me is part of the normal rhythm and business as usual of us as a water company. I think for us as a you know, I think the next 6 months for me is that we've got some real challenges in what we want to try and do as an organisation, and more what I mean by that is in a sense of performance. Yeah. We know that our recent history of where we've come from, our performance as a business has not been good enough. And therefore, we've set ourselves some really challenging targets and objectives as a business over the next few years to really make a huge difference, whether it's massively reducing leakage, you know, reducing the interruptions we have supplies to customers, you know, improving our customer service. There's a whole variety of things that we really want to focus on. So for the next 6 months, for me, it's you know, what I'm all about now is saying, right, okay, what do we, you know, we've already started, but really continuing them with embedding those changes we need to make, which allow us to make those kind of changes and those step changes that are visible to both our own staff and our customers, etc. That for me is what the 6 months is all about. Yeah. And the way that I work is, again, I don't get to, what I tend to find and what my experience tells me is if you focus on what's core and what's important to you as a business, and I call it getting the basics right, but just do the basics really, really well, then actually what you'll find is that you'll deliver a lot of that performance. Yeah. And we have to be honest, we've just not quite got that right the last few years as a business, and we're putting that back in place, and hopefully that will make a huge difference. And that's what's really, for me, whether I'm speaking with my managers, with my team, etc., that then becomes my focus. Yeah. You know, there's no silver bullet in life to many problems. Throwing money at problems doesn't necessarily solve problems either. Actually getting underneath what the issues are and sorting them out once and for all is what's important. And that really for me is what we're focused on the next 6 months. And we hope we don't have any major weather event which derails us for a period of time, and we can carry on with that. But yeah, that for me is the next 6 months, as well as welcoming a new chief exec and a new boss. I've got a new boss.
Of course, yeah.
So yeah.
Are you excited about that?
I am, yeah, I am. I really am. I've met Sarah a couple of times. Get on really well. Very kind of, you know, my outlook. We seem to hit it off, and the outlooks feel very similar. You know, and I think Sarah will be a real, you know, real positive for this business, and really looking forward to it. And looking forward to working with Sarah. You always, I guess, with any new boss, you're always not a little bit. It's just natural, isn't it?
Yeah,
you get.
Yeah.
But actually, the first sessions and the meetings I've had with Sarah have been great, really, really positive, and really enjoyed them. So, I'm really looking forward to working with Sarah and just what mark Sarah wants to make on the business and what we want to try and achieve. I think it will be and I think very quickly our people will sense there is a different feel to the business, and Sarah will bring a different style, which I think will be quite different from what we've had in the past. So I think it'll be, I'm really excited and I'm really excited and optimistic about it, to be honest, the future.
And just to end on a lighter note, I mean, you mentioned that about winning the FA Cup, and obviously we've got something in common. But I mean, tell everyone, tell our I think we got about 18 viewers. Tell our 18 viewers how big the FA Cup is, Steve. Just take it away.
I guess for some people who win it a lot just get complacent about it, don't they? Maybe, but I know for me, I grew up in Wigan. Yes, Wigan's my hometown. I moved away when I went to university. When I grew up in the 70s, Wigan hadn't even been elected to the Football League. So, like everybody at that time, you were a Liverpool fan, because Liverpool, I was only 20 miles from Liverpool, if that.
And they were great then as well.
And they were, in the 70s, they were just under Bob Paisley particularly, was just the team you watched. They won everything, didn't they? And it was only when I got into high school that, in the 80s, that I knew that for me, I got to go and watch Wigan. It was the local team, and I just got hooked, just completely hooked. And what for me was that we battled in the lowest division of football. We, a couple of seasons, we only just scraped not going down at the time to the Vauxhall Conference. That tells you my age. And we survived. And then over a number of years, we just worked our way up through divisions, got to the Premier League. That was an incredible. My son was 5 when we got to the Premier League, and until he was teenage years, he knew nothing other than Wigan were a Premier League side, which was just crazy, nuts. And then even getting to the FA Cup final was something very special. I think we got to like the 6th round against Norwich back in the 80s or something like Leeds or something, and we'd not really gone very far. And we were lucky to get past the 3rd round, to be quite frank. But we actually went on a run in that year where I think we played every game was, if I remember rightly, every game was away from home. So we were drawn away from home every round. Including people like Everton, and we worked our way through and got to the final, never thinking that you always hope, don't you, you're going to win. But playing Man City with Aguero and Yaya Toure and all these kind of stuff, you're thinking, well, just and it was like watching it 5 minutes, hang on. Then you get to the second half thinking, this keep going, and then to score. And it was just it's interesting with Wigan, some real highs and lows. Some real highs and lows. And the one thing I guess I can always never get taken away from you is when you win the FA Cup. It's always something that's in the record books. You can get promoted, you can get relegated. No one can take away that FA Cup. So for me, it's it's one of the, that and promotion to Premier League were 2 of the key highlights for me. So it was just almost living in a dream world for a period of time. It was amazing.
Look, with Arsenal, no one's won it more than Arsenal at 14 times. But I tell you what, there's no complacency. Even though we couldn't be at Wembley 3 weeks ago, oh my God, it was still an absolutely magical weekend. And I think
for me that would have been hard if you were like for us and it had fallen this year and not been able to go to Wembley to watch it. That would have been devastating. I guess the one thing is Arsenal and Chelsea go a lot to the FA Cup. And I know you still missed it, but if you'd had another club that it was their first time and couldn't have done that, that would have been heartbreaking. That would have been tough.
I've been to 3 finals, 3 semi-finals, 3 community shields in the last 9 years. I've seen Wembley enough. So but still, it's
still the same. You can't get it's incredibly emotional. You can't help it. You still have the nerves. Even now, I was watching online. Watching games because we were trying, obviously going through a bad period at the moment into administration. Could we get the 12 points? Me and my son were watching the games still nervous as hell watching games, nervous and it was that last game watching Fulham and we were just couldn't get that second goal. To me, we were safe and then we ended up going down and now it's all kind of unravelled, which is just desperately sad. And I just hope we get a buyer and we can survive. You know, that's all it is at the moment for us. I'm not worried about which league we're in. Just want the club to survive. You know.
Yeah,
So,
well, wish you all the best. I mean, COVID's hit football clubs as much as it's hit other businesses. So, right, I think we've gone over time, but we were talking FA Cups. I think it's fine, Miles. I think it's fine. That's
we can edit that out, mate. Don't worry about
that. Steve, thank you. Thanks for your time. Really good
welcome.
chat. And I think it was great to have an insight into kind of your world. So, thank you.
No, you're welcome. Cheers.
Miles, see you next week.
See you, mate.
Cheers.